Now I want to speak about today's chapel. Today is the Barnes Science and Faith Symposium. It was established in 2010 to help us explore issues of science and faith. In this chapel, we get an opportunity to meet a world-renowned scholar that would speak about science and faith. And we are honored today. We'll introduce our speaker just a little bit later. But we're honored today to have the founders of this symposium. Dr. and Mrs. Barnes are here in the house. Would you give them a warm welcome? Yeah. Dr. Barnes is a professor emeritus in biology, and he taught here at Roberts from 1970 to 2004. And his wife, Avis, has taught in the Pavilion School District for 30 years. We're so honored to have you here in this chapel, and we thank you so much for providing this chapel for us.
Good morning. It is indeed my privilege to introduce our speaker today, Brother Guy Consolmango. Since 2014, Brother Guy has served as the president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation. He is the Pope's astronomer. Brother Guy studied planetary sciences at MIT, where he earned his bachelor's and master's degrees and completed his PhD in 1978. He was a researcher at Harvard and MIT, served in the U.S. Peace Corps in Kenya, and taught physics at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania before joining the Jesuits in 1989. He began serving as the astronomer at the Vatican Conservatory in 1993 and was curator of the Vatican Meteorite Collection until his appointment as president in 2014. Brother Guy has been elected to the governing boards of a number of international scientific organizations, including the International Astronomical Union and the Meteoritical Society. Along with more than 200 scientific publications, he's the author of 6 popular astronomy books, one entitled, "Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial?" and other questions from the astronomer's inbox at the Vatican Observatory. In just the short time I've gotten to know Brother Guy, I've been impressed by his warm and engaging spirit and his love of our Creator. I know that you'll be blessed by him today. The scripture reading this morning is from Baruch 3, verse 35. This is our God. No other can be compared to him. Please join me in welcoming Brother Guy to the platform.
Thank you very much. Having a representative of the Vatican, a Jesuit no less, in a year that's celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, speaks volumes of the distance we've covered. We do have a lot to learn from each other. And so with that in mind, today I want to bring to you a couple of Catholic bits. A reflection on a passage from Scripture. The prophet Baruch was considered part of the Apocrypha, accepted by Catholics, not by a lot of Protestants. And then reflections from a couple of our popes, our recent popes. We heard that reading, How Marvelous God Is, from Baruch. The verse before it is where I'll start. Where the stars at their posts shine and rejoice. When he calls them, they answer, Here we are, shining with joy for their Maker. There's 3 important messages that the prophet Baruch has here. First of all, he reminds us that the stars are creatures. They're created by God. They're not gods themselves, the way that the people around Israel believed at the time. Second, he reminds us that their Maker is also our Maker. And third, he reminds us that, like the stars, we too are called by name by our Maker, and our proper response is to shine with joy. The context of Baruch is this. Baruch was the secretary to Jeremiah. He was writing in exile in Babylon. You remember Jeremiah was the one warning that the exile was going to come. This chapter of Baruch that we read from starts, Lord Almighty God, God of Israel, the anguished soul, the dismayed spirit cries out to hear you. Hear, O Lord, and have mercy. You are a merciful God. Have mercy on us who have sinned against you. You are enthroned forever, while we are perishing forever. It's reflecting on the sins of the Jewish people that had led up to the Babylonian captivity, but then it sends a message of hope with this marvelous paean to wisdom, including the passage we've just heard, rejoicing stars. We shine with joy even in the face of our exile. With that exile in mind, I want to read another passage. This was an exhortation that Pope Francis read to the general congregation of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. We held a congregation, we do this about every 10 years, and representatives from around the world come to meet in Rome. I was one of them. I was in the aula when he came to us and gave this exhortation of what we should be doing. Pope himself had been a Jesuit, of course. He had been in one of these congregations himself. He knew the lay of the land. He knew who he was talking to. And because he was speaking to Jesuits, he used a lot of Jesuit jargon. So I'm going to help you through a few of these bits. But among the things that he charged us to do was this interesting passage. He says, allow ourselves to be moved by the Lord on the cross. Be moved by the Lord on the cross, both in his person and as present in the sufferings of so many of our brothers and sisters, indeed the majority of the human race. Reflect on the services of mercy. I use the plural, he says, because mercy is not an abstraction, but a lifestyle consisting in concrete gestures rather than mere words. Reaching out and touching the flesh of the neighbor. This grace begins with a colloquy. Now, a colloquy is a kind of prayer where you speak, you have a conversation with God, you speak and you listen. A colloquy of mercy that's an extension of our colloquy with the Lord crucified because of my sins. It's a conversation full of sentiments of shame, confusion, sorrow, and tears of gratitude, seeing precisely who I am, making myself small, and who God is, magnifying him, he who preserved my life until now. By seeing who Jesus is, hanging on the cross for me. That last is a quote from the writings of St. Ignatius, our founder. And he goes on, Ignatius lives completely on God's mercy, even in the littlest things. He felt that the greater the obstacle he raised, the greater the goodness with which the Lord treated him. Ignatius, in formulating his experience of mercy, the more he was failing the Lord, the more the Lord showers him with grace, liberates the dynamic strength of mercy, which often we dilute with abstract formula, legalistic conditions. The Lord who looks on us with mercy and chooses us, sends us forth with the same powerful mercy to the poor, the sinners, the abandoned, the crucified, anyone who suffers from injustice and violence in today's world. Only when we experience this healing force in our lives and in our wounds, which often have first and last names, as individuals and as a body, only then will we be able to lose our fear of allowing ourselves to be moved by the immense suffering of our brothers and sisters, to go out and walk patiently with our peoples, learning from them the best way to help and serve them. So, what does this have to do with astronomy? The beauty of the stars in a universe where we also see pain and suffering reminds us not merely that we are sinners, we are redeemed sinners. Baruch, the exile, from his exile, sees the face of the stars shouting for joy. In them, he's recognizing in the universe the presence of our salvation. Stars are not gods, never that. But in the incarnation, the fact that God became human means that the crucifixion was so real, so horrible, so powerful, but in that, the universe itself has been cleansed and quickened, to quote the writer, the mystic St. Athanasius. The other night, I took my little telescope out, spent about 15 minutes looking at the stars, a couple of old favorites, a galaxy, a double star, a little nebula. They're old friends. I've gazed at them since I was a little kid, growing up in Michigan. It was actually, though, a lot like a moment of prayer. I'm a professional astronomer, I'm a Jesuit brother. I find enormous satisfaction, a sense of God's presence, when I tease out some subtle truth in the data. But even as a professional astronomer, I'm also an amateur, one who does it for love. I've used the biggest telescope on Earth, the Keck 4-meter telescope. I also have a little 3-inch telescope that I love to use. When I say that looking at the stars is like a moment of prayer, I don't mean that, you can get the wrong idea, my gosh. I don't mean I had a mystical experience. No. I don't mean that my soul was transported to another dimension. Doesn't usually happen when I look through a telescope. Doesn't usually happen when I pray either. Most stargazing, like most prayer, is really usually just a simple pause in the business of the day. A moment to retreat, reflect, a quiet period that doesn't have fireworks and incense, but it does leave you feeling calm, a little bit more at peace, a little bit refreshed. I'm not the first person, I'm not even the first Jesuit, to point this out. In his autobiography, our founder, St. Ignatius, writes, when he was young, the greatest consolation that he received was from gazing at the sky and the stars, and he did this often and for quite a long time. For most of human history, people have conflated heaven and the heavens, God's place, as something up there in the sky with the stars. We know that this is a kind of naive view of God, but maybe our ancestors were onto something. The beauty of the night sky can be a wonderful source to inspire contemplation in both creation and the Creator. Well, one of the Jesuit mantras is you find God in all things, and those things up there, and they are things, but they are a great place to find the Creator. Astronomy also is great because it's something everybody can do. It doesn't take special equipment to look at the stars. The more you know what to look for, the more you know what you're looking at, the deeper your sense of joy is. But you can start just by knowing nothing. When was the last time that you contemplated the marvelous things without number that God's done in this universe? Take a look. Learn to see the sky. Go outside every day. Maybe if you can do it the same time every night, or maybe it's every morning before sunrise, if that's, what fits your schedule. This is an act of prayer we're talking about. Treat it as such. Do it regularly. Do it in silence. Do it alone. Do it, at least at first, without a book. I mean, you want a book? I've written a book. You can buy the book, but don't buy the book yet. Do it without a book. Do it without binoculars. Do it without expecting what to see, and let the stars show you what they have to show. Leave your book, leave your expectations at home. Look long enough so that from night to night or morning to morning, you can recognize on your own the patterns in the sky that are there. All you have to do is go out, look up. You can try looking through a window, if you're an invalid or something, maybe that's the best you can do. But if you're not an invalid, why imprison yourself in your room? Ask any prisoner. They'd much rather be able to look under the real sky. Get yourself outdoors. Dress warmly. Be comfortable. Find a spot that can be your personal observatory. Okay, ideally you're going to want, a dark site away from city lights, open away from trees, away from buildings, something you can get to. Yeah, those sites are not easy to find. Find what you've got. Look where you are. I mentioned that book. I wrote one of these How to Use a Telescope books with a co-author who grew up in Yonkers and did his stargazing from the roof of his apartment house and became a great astronomer doing that. Look closely at the stars. Pay attention to them. How many of you ever noticed that stars have colors? Different stars have different colors. Do you know what a planet is? Do you know how to tell the difference between a planet and a star? Stars twinkle. Planets don't. The planets are usually the brightest thing in the sky, except for maybe an airplane. Or maybe a satellite. Have you been able to see satellites? Moving slower than an airplane, but certainly moving as you watch. Find the rhythm of the sky. Notice how the moon changes over a month. Notice how the sun's position changes over the year. Notice how different stars come and then go as the year progresses in its seasons. Notice, if you travel, how the stars look different from the north or from the south. You can see stars in Florida you can't see in New York. Watching the sky tells us more than just that God makes beautiful things. Learning the stars teaches us to recognize both regularity and change. You have to know what's regular, what's normal, before you can recognize what's unusual. Looking at the stars teaches us to be aware of both pattern and surprise. In stars, we find beauty, we find subtlety. The most beautiful things can often be the most subtle. I'm reminded of the passage where Elijah at Horeb hears all the earthquakes and the storms, but only hears God in the still, small voice. You have to look in order to see. And seeing is more than just looking. It's paying attention. That's hard. But it's also spiritual. Learning to pay attention is learning to pray. You have to see in order to understand, and understanding never ends. You never understand the sky, you just get used to it. There was a mathematician at MIT who said, you never understand mathematics, you just get used to it. I can tell as somebody who taught physics, you never understand physics, you just get used to it. You get used to it by doing all those terrible problems. You never understand your friends, you just get used to them. Your friend is not a problem to be solved. Let's say your friend hates cats. There are people out there who hates cats. Let's say your friend hates cats. Every time a cat comes up, he goes, "Argh!" And it's become a running joke. You show pictures of cats and they'll go screaming and running. And one day you show up at your friend's place, in your friend's room, and he's got this little kitten and he's purring and going ooh and ah over it, and you go, okay, who took my friend? Where did you come from? Maybe he's got a new girlfriend who likes cats. Who knows what the reason is? The point is, you wouldn't notice that there was anything weird unless you knew that normally he doesn't like cats. Science is the same way. You find the regularities in the universe because, the most exciting thing a scientist can ever say is not, I found it, but rather, that's interesting. And you can only notice when something's different when you know what something is supposed to be. And that's paying attention. You have to look in order to recognize. That means not only seeing the beauty in the stars, but also the pain of the sin here on earth. That's why we must tie the joy of the stars with the pain of the cross. The pain that's visible whenever we see sin on earth. The fundamental good news of the gospel is that we are redeemed sinners. So why is it so hard for people to hear the good news? Well, some people, tortured souls, refuse to see that they're redeemed. Most of the time, we refuse to admit that we're sinners, and therefore we refuse to admit that we need to be redeemed. So let me end with a citation from a different pope, in this case, Pope Benedict. This was a homily he gave on Holy Saturday night. If you've ever seen the big Holy Saturday ceremonies, it starts with lighting a candle at midnight in a dark church. And this was in St. Peter's Basilica in 2012. He begins his homily by recalling how the liturgy of the word, the readings that you do at that point, begins with the Genesis account, "Let there be light." Obviously, light's a good thing. We think of darkness as the enemy of the light. But spiritual darkness isn't the same as the darkness of night. Pope Benedict points out the darkness that poses a real threat to humankind is the fact that while we can see and investigate tangible material things, we can't see where the world is going or where it's coming from. We can't see where our own life is going. We have a hard time seeing what's good and what's evil. And if we can't see the difference between good and evil, then what good are all these other technical, human-made lights? What good are all the fruits of our technological achievements? I like technology. I went to MIT, don't get me wrong. But it's not the same thing as the light of "Let there be light." Our artificial lights can be wonderful signs of progress, yeah, but the Pope reminds us they can also be dangers that put us and the world at risk. The light created by God gives life. But what of that light that we try to manufacture for ourselves in order to replace God's light? The Pope ends, "Today, we can illuminate our cities so brightly that the stars of the sky are no longer visible." Isn't this an image of the problems caused by our version of enlightenment? We can find God in the stars, the light in the sky, but only if we allow ourselves the time and the darkness to see them. Only once we can see them, when we stop blinding ourselves with our own puny lights.
Come on, would you show your appreciation? Thank you, Brother Guy. Thank you. As you prepare to go, may your awareness of God's creative activity be increased. Go in peace.